So let's go ahead and call this work session to order. Today is Wednesday, November 4th. Time is 1 p.m. We will open it up for visitor comments. If you'd like to make a comment and you're watching, please wave, raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you. See, there's lots of people watching.
I do not see anybody raising their hand, Mayor.
Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the first item on our agenda, which is to review House Bill 2001 and proposed duplex code changes. I'm going to turn it over to our city planner, Jacob Greichen.
Thank you, Mayor Scholl. So today we're talking about duplexes and some other associated regulations. And we just didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let's talk about duplexes. There's a couple things that prompted this. And the main thing that prompted this is state legislation. Last year, Oregon adopted House Bill 2001. And what that does is that requires certain cities and counties too of a certain size to adopt rules that helps advance what's known as the missing middle housing. And we'll show a slide on that just to talk about it. But I think in the last few years, in the various housing presentations you've had as a council, you've heard that term. I'm not going to use it too much, but it's kind of related. So what this House bill did is it says that for certain cities of a certain population, which includes St. Helens, because we are around 14,000, and this anybody more than 10,000 has to comply with this. It says that on every lot that allows a detached single-family dwelling, you know, the typical home that you see, we are obligated to allow a duplex under the same rules. So this is historic, really. The United States has had single family zoning for a long time, and it's historic for St. Helens in that as of next year, it ends.
Jacob, could I just step in for just a second?
Sure.
Could we get you to people to mute their computers, because we're getting some static feedback from one individual, and I'm not sure who it is, but it seems to like it was either a shirt rubbing up against or breathing really loud. So that's how sensitive our computers are.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
Yep.
Now, the one thing I want to point out, because I'm going to be talking about the state's model code and then the Oregon administrative rules. And it's possible, let's say we're like, well, to heck with the state. We're not going to do anything. And if we did that, then the model code the state adopted takes over on July 1st, which has some provisions that may not be as suitable for us as if we had to adopt our own code. But it is July 1st, so we don't have a huge window of time to work on this. The planning commission's talked about it. The council's talked about it. And basically, because you are the legislative body, we want to bounce some of these things off of you so you are aware and can provide direction in some cases. So the other source that we have to look at duplexes and such is our very own housing needs analysis that was also adopted last year. And there's a couple things in there for us to look at in the future. One is adopting a cottage cluster code. And at the beginning of this year, I was hoping to work on that and have that folded into this, but that didn't work out. So that'll have to be later. And then at the bottom of here, you can see where it talks about considering allowing duplexes in R7 zone land. And that House bill ended up making us do that even more aggressive than I know the planning commission is comfortable with. So anyways, that's the premise. That's why we're here talking about this stuff and why we have to do some things in the next 8 months or so. Now, this map is interesting. These are the communities affected by this House bill. And when I saw this, my first reaction was, all of a sudden I feel oh so alone. So look at the Tri-County area, Columbia, Clatsop, and Tillamook counties. Do you see anybody else in those 3 counties affected by this? No, just little old St. Helens. And it kind of made me realize the significance of St. Helens and its size. Now, Astoria here, they are on the verge of being 10,000 in population. So they'll have to deal with this really soon. But right now, in these 3 rural counties surrounding the metro area, you know, we're the lone soldier dealing with this. So isn't that fun? And of course, if you look at the metro area, not surprisingly, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there, which isn't that far. Okay, so brief discussion on missing middle. The whole idea behind this concept is it's all these housing types between your larger apartment complexes, which we have some in town, and then your typical detached single family dwelling. So everything ranging from duplexes, cottage clusters, fourplexes, townhouses, etc., so on and so forth. Currently, our code allows all of these except the cottage clusters, and this just gives duplex a little more of a firm footing in the landscape. At least that's the idea that the state has to address the statewide housing problems. So the first thing we have to look at is zoning, because zoning says what you can and cannot do with a property. That's why we wouldn't allow a toxic waste recycling center in the middle of a residential zone, and why we wouldn't allow a housing development in the middle of the St. Helens Industrial Park. We have zoning. And the first thing we can look at when we talk about zoning is our official zoning district map. Here it is here in all of its glory. And generally what we're talking about are these residential zonings here that are in the yellow to brown spectrum of color. But you can see, you know, that's pretty vast areas. There's a lot of residential here in this tan color. On the east side of town, you have these pockets of lower density zoning in the north part of town, close to Dalton Lake. And then on the west side of town, you have a whole bunch of residential zoning too. Not surprising when you drive around town and see all the houses. So if we look at all of the types of residential uses allowed in the city and look at the zoning district, here's the one pager. If people say right now, well, how does residential uses work in your city? This is the sheet you show people, although this is going to change. I put an Easter egg in here. That's this one here. It's cottage clusters. Our code doesn't allow this or address it at all. So right now it's a big no in all those cases. And hopefully that changes in the next few years. But of course, the main thing that we got to deal with right now are duplexes. So this is where we're at now as a whole. What we have to do, now we're taking that table and boiling it down just to duplexes, manufactured homes, and detached single family dwellings. State law says we have to treat manufactured homes and detached single family dwellings more or less the same from a use standpoint. What the state law says is anywhere where the detached single family dwelling is permitted, that's what the P stands for, duplexes have to be permitted as well. So right now in the R10 zone, they're not permitted at all. And they're allowed by conditional use permit, which is just a special permit. It goes to the Planning Commission public hearing in the R7 zone and the not very common mobile home residential zone. And that conditional use permit could be a burden and intimidating for some people. Well, I'm not going to build a duplex here. And so that burden will no longer be the case. And then in R10, nothing's more burdensome than saying no, and that no will turn into a yes. So down here, these are the changes. The no's and conditional uses become permitted. So from a zoning standpoint, that's what's going to happen. Now, what is a duplex? Is it a toxic waste cooling pond? Is it industrial agricultural operation. I think we all know what a duplex is, but actually we have to think about that some. So this is the first question for the council. Now, let me start by saying, if you don't have an opinion as a council on some of these matters where we have some choices, that's okay. That's why you have the planning commission to do the heavy lifting. But if you do have an opinion, I definitely want to know about it now. And even though 2 council seats are going to change at the beginning of the year, which is always interesting when you're dealing with legislative stuff amongst elections. So here's the first question. Currently, our code says that duplexes, which basically means 2 dwelling units on a single lot, need to be attached. So they can be attached in this vertical method or horizontal method, excuse me, or vertically. But you have one single building. The other option is to allow them to just be 2 detached units on a single lot. So currently our code will allow this one and this one. If we did nothing and let that model code take over that I mentioned, it would mandate allowing either or. And just following the state law, we can choose. We can choose one or the other. The Planning Commission was unanimously in favor in sticking with the attached. And if the council has any opinion on this matter, now is the time to talk about that.
I always have an opinion on it. In my opinion, I think that the detached are not a whole lot different than what could be considered an ADU, other than the 75% or 1,200 maximum. And it makes 0 sense to try to have a 1,900 square foot and a 1,200 square foot on one lot, even following ADU standards, when you could have 2 1,200, which are 3-bedroom housing on a 1,200 square foot, versus you have to build one that's 4-bedroom with a big great room to actually maximize your ADU. On some lots that it would work, which is legal right now.
Yeah, very astute, Mayor. You have been paying attention. I'm very proud of that statement. So if we went with this definition here, our ADU rules would be worthless.
Yep.
If we stuck with these, then the way to have a detached unit would be the ADU, although it would have to be smaller. And so there is that ADU implication.
Jacob, I've got a question.
Sure.
Does the, on a detached, what is the code call for distance from one dwelling to another? Is there a 6 foot, is there a 6 foot space, a 2 foot space? What's the code call for?
And that's a real great question. And currently the code calls for nothing. It would be driven by building code. And if memory serves me right, building code gets excited when 2 buildings are within 6 feet. That may have changed, but there's a distance where then you need firewalls. And so that would be the second question, is if you went with this option here, do we go with the building code, or do we try to implement a spacing standard? And the easy or the low hanging fruit for picking that spacing standard would probably be a side yard requirement, which can range from 5, 7, or 10 feet. But if you say, well, as a council, no, staff, we really think a duplex should meet this definition, then we'll have to work on that separation requirement.
Well, then also that ought to follow that up with a quality of life issue regarding noise and the proximity of one family to another family. with a bit of space will really help the noise issues. And I know this from being in condos that have very thin walls and have, you can hear all the noises that's going on next door, or if it happens to be vertically, you can hear all the noise that's going on upstairs. And you know, who wants to live in a drum? I mean, that's in some senses depends on the construction and how it goes in line with sound reduction from one to another. So there is a quality of life issue kind of like that needs to be talked about. Was that talked about through the Planning Commission?
It was not.
That disappoints me.
Okay, Jacob, classically, the word duplex is two similar living spaces attached, basically mirror units of each other that are built at the same time. Now, the detached choice, you could build one and then build the other.
That's correct.
And while you could name it anything you want, the classic duplex was built at the same time, and other than being left side, right side, basically half of the property was one, half the other. And you don't have that. And the vertical comment, that's an apartment building, we'll say by classic definition, not legal definition, that's up to the legislature, obviously. But I would stick, if we're going to say duplex, they have to be left, right, Siamese twins, if you would, built at the same time. Then you've got your other building codes, and some places do have sound requirements for that center wall. You obviously have to have fire requirements for that center wall or connecting wall. But when you mishmash and don't require building at the same time, you can call anything a duplex later on down the road. That seems to open up some real problems.
So, yeah, I like this conversation. We're all over the place because my feeling on it is like what we have on this side of the track. When I say this side of the tracks, is every counselor that is current lives on this side of the tracks. We have a lot and a half housing, and we have, which was considered a big home at the time, 1,000 to 1,200 square foot, sometimes just a little bit off center of that lot and a half. Now, with our ADU standard on 1,000 foot, there can only be a 750 foot additional dwelling unit, that is allowed. But why are we, with this model and the ORS, the Oregon state law allows both, why would we feel the need to not allow somebody where it fits all the setbacks and they can have all the required parking and all that stuff has to check out in order for them to build in the first place? Why would we not allow somebody to put a brand new 1,200 square foot home and be able to claim taxes on that, where there's maybe an older 1,000 foot home on the same adjacent lot? Because tax lots were split up sometimes in lot and a halves on this side of the tracks. If you look, especially over in like the South 9th area and some of those, they're like a lot and a half size. So they're 100 deep by almost 100 wide.
I'm going to go at this, Rick, in a little different way. We have a state law that's trying to make the whole state look exactly alike. Everybody's lot's got to do the same thing. And St. Helens, as you just pointed out, had some differences from here to there, which made it St. Helens. Now, we're getting set up that we're going to have, duplexes are going to have to look alike, or a building is going to have to look alike. And going down the road 20 or 30 years, that's when it's going to bite us. Right now, we can kind of live with it and commiserate. But I think we got to come up hard and decide what we're going to allow within state law, because we know they're going to change that within 20 or 30 years. But we're getting pushed to everything looking alike.
So that would definitely not be alike. My scenario would not be alike, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. I mean, and then that's the question. That's really the question.
I'm just trying to, yeah, I was just trying to follow. I mean, we're just discussing stuff here, so I was just trying to follow. Yeah, and that's kind of my point is, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of those areas that living could happen, and an ADU doesn't make sense because it's just a little bit too small. And this would allow somebody to make sense of a lot.
Well, the other problem we have is if you take a look at the original map of St. Helens, all the lots are pretty much alike. Except they forgot that we had culverts, gullies, piles of rock and everything in the way. And some of the rules are made based on that old map. Everything's alike, which it isn't. And that's kind of some of the places we get in trouble is how different our ground is that we want to put living spaces on it.
Jacob, question for you on lot coverage. What is the minimum for a duplex versus a single family dwelling unit?
And we will get to that.
Okay.
And then,
So-
yeah, I have a question as well.
Well,
Jacob.
I think it's pertinent to this discussion right now. That's why I was
Oh.
asking.
Okay, no, that's cool. So that's one of the things that is the same for duplexes and single family dwellings currently is the lot coverage is identical. And right now it's 35%. And that applies to all buildings and structures by the lot size, 35% as your base. And then that can be increased 5% for building additions or new sheds, accessory structures, or an ADU. The only difference with that is the apartment residential zone, which is 50% with a 55% bump up. So that's the current. We could explore a permanent increase in the lot coverage with this. Our lot coverage standards have been around since the 70s.
Jacob, I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Okay, so if I own a home and it's it's 1,500 square feet, and I decide to its own single family residential or whatever, and then I decide that I want a duplex on that lot. Can I just add on to the home, keeping possibly a common wall, and design a second dwelling or a second home and call it a duplex? Here's one home that's been a single family residential, and it goes into then it changes into a duplex. Is that possible? Could I do that?
Yes.
Thank you.
And in that same scenario, could you, because I'm not completely sure about this, and I did study it fairly closely, can you also consider that an ADU if it was 75% and not exceed the 70 or the 1,200 square foot?
Yes. And the reason that I think our ADU rules are going to become antiquated. Why would someone do something that needs a permit? Because the duplex isn't going to require a special permit, just the building permit, like a house. So why would someone want to go through an ADU permit when they can just get that as a duplex? And that's where this discussion is really important, whether you keep it detached or detached. If you go with this definition, then the size of these two detached units is limited by the basic parameters of the code: your yard requirements, your lot coverage, any distance between the structures, and building height. Under the ADU rules, you do have that 75% maximum size for the second unit.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Okay, another go. We have a nice building. Can I divide it in half and call it a duplex?
Yeah,
Divide the building in half?
Yeah.
Yes. If you could meet the applicable building code requirements, yes.
Are you gonna have a space for rent soon, Topaz?
I got lots of space here, baby.
You can,
I mean, this duplex business, I mean, we can have chicken coops all over the place.
yeah, typically building code wouldn't allow people to reside in chicken coops, but a good designer could design a dwelling to resemble a chicken coop as long as it has all the amenities required for living.
Here's what I'm stuck with. When you have that mediocre house, and if you were to make sure they were attached and you wanted the curb appeal correctly, you'd have to tear off siding and the whole works to attach them and make them look right. Versus you could have a mediocre detached and a really nice detached, and it still has to meet within all the lot coverage, which is going to be difficult in itself if it fits. So that's where I'm kind of struggling. Like, there are those 1,000 square foot homes, 2-bedroom around. As a matter of fact, our engineer Tim is renting one that's on a huge lot, and it's a little tiny box, and it would be very easy just to keep that there and build another house pretty easily where he's at. So I just look at that type of situation and I say, why not?
Yeah, this route provides maximum flexibility and creativeness to builders.
Mm-hmm.
Voting for this is, you're trying to maintain a certain vision that you have of our residential neighborhoods. And it's not the easiest answer, but right now I have Shoal and Morton as supporting detached. I have Topaz who's against it, and Locke is being quiet.
Yeah, where's Councilor Locke? Is he still with us?
So, so I'm for it.
You are for the detached?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't think Carlson is present.
Oh, no, I meant to announce that she had asked to be excused prior to the meeting.
Oh, okay.
He had future, yeah.
I have one other question, Jacob, and it
Sure.
follows the line of probably Counselor Topaz. But let's think that I have a 800 foot square residential unit, small, and I have a big lot, and I've already zoned on that small unit, and I want to build a larger residence. Can that existing home, I don't have to tear it down, can that existing home be the ADU to the new home that I'm building? In other words, I build a 2,000 square foot home, a dwelling, and on the same lot that the 1,000 foot dwelling is in, but I switch the what is an ADU and what is the main residence. Can I do that? Could I petition the planning commission to do that?
You can, and you don't even have to petition the planning commission for it. It's
But you
just through
can.
your basic administratively approved ADU permit. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
One other question, kind of a general question. You use the term manufactured home. What exactly is that? Is that something that's built off-site, or does that have specific specifications?
It does have specific specifications, and those changed in 1976, and they're still the same today. And a manufactured home gets a certain type of seal certificate or something from the state saying, okay, this is built to all your state stuff. So it is built elsewhere. And when we get one of those, we do have rules that say they're supposed to be multi-sectional, enclose a minimum space, and have some newer looking features, which essentially weeds out the old tin can looking ones. And when we get a building permit for those, our building department looks at the foundation and the tie-ins, but not necessarily the structural elements themselves because they have that certificate. And so the state does have very specific codes on what a manufactured home is.
Well, the thought was I want a home that's gonna have 42,000 feet floor on it, but it's gonna be manufactured someplace and brought in sections. Then that goes to the state for validation that the design and construction is correct.
Yeah, I can't say I've seen a lot of manufactured homes that size, but it's conceivable. Sure.
Well, I've seen some in Columbia, Maryland, where they basically, all the homes were built in a factory because they had, the big jigs set up and they were brought in on big trucks and set up. And they had various floor plans as compared to a box that's, 20 by 40 comes in on a set of wheels behind a truck.
Yeah, you're referring more to modular homes. And I don't know if those are as easy with the building code, but it's same thing, prove that it meets the codes and you can have it there.
Okay, so manufactured home is not a super hard definition other than the requirement it meets certain design and construction.
It is a hard definition because of the way the law looks at it. But if you wanted to have something modular that came in pieces, the code doesn't necessarily prohibit that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I at least kind of know where you're going with this. Any more questions on duplex definition? Nope. Okay. All right, everybody's favorite topic, parking. So currently, and this is this area here, if we look at our parking requirements for single dwellings, for manufactured homes, and for apartments, a lot of the rules say 2 parking spaces per unit. In the case of apartments, you have to have 2 plus bedroom. Of course, ADUs, it's 0. So under today's rules, if we got a duplex, we'd say, well, we need 4 spaces total because it's 2 dwelling units, 2 spaces per unit, 2 times 2 is 4. I was able to answer that despite my Class I education. The state of Oregon says, so if we choose to do something, we are restricted to 0 to 2. We cannot require more than 2 parking spaces per duplex, period. If we do nothing and let the model code take over, then we can't require any parking for a new duplex. And this was one of the more aggressive components that the state put in the code. It was really interesting that they did this. And in some of the presentations with the state, their point was they wanted to make a point. Planning Commission voted for 2. So this is your question for the council: 0, 1, or 2 required parking spaces for a duplex.
Could we do 1.5? Could we do 1.5?
We could.
I mean, that would be, so per duplex, right? So it'd be 3 parking spots for a duplex.
No, per duplex, period. Not per dwelling unit in the duplex.
Oh, well, it would have to be a car each. Yeah, it'd have to be a two spaces. Yeah.
So we cannot require more than 2 total for the entire duplex.
Okay, Jacob, what's the size of a parking space? 6, 8, 15 feet?
9 by 18
That's the official parking space. I
in the
can't
city of
have,
St. Helens.
can I,
And
8 by 12? Just I'm
That's-
gonna make it up.
And that's a good point. I remember with the state presentation, well, did they define parking space? Could we define parking space as an 80 by 80 foot pad? That is a way of playing the game. But remember, we cannot say a duplex has to have larger parking spaces. It would have to be something that we apply evenly. And so we have to be really careful. So let's say we said, okay, well, a parking space, one parking space is an 18 by 18 pad. And then we'd have to apply that universally.
Does a parking space have to be hard pad?
Based on St. Helens rules, it needs to be paved with asphalt, concrete, or a similar material as approved by the city.
Thank you.
But we could define a area of our own choosing. Obviously, there are implications all over the place, but there is not a state mandated parking space area.
No,
The-
we do
our-
have flexibility in how we define parking space.
Well, what I could say is about our current standard is it absolutely fits an SUV perfectly, 9 by 18, if you actually look at that, and was very well thought out. I think to change a parking standard would be, because most of the time, that's bare minimum. Most of the time, we ask for 9 by 20 because of the 20-foot setback anyhow. So it's generally 9 by 20. Very rare that we have somebody apply to get 18 feet bare minimum.
Do these have to be side by side, or they can be front to back, or is there any definition?
Well, our code points it to being side by side, not tandem. So tandem would be one in front of the other, side by side. And the idea is that you have two functionally independent parking spaces. In the tandem situation, if you have a car here in the garage and a car here in the driveway, that car in the driveway prevents that one from the garage from doing anything. And so we base it on functional parking spaces.
So I'm gonna just go ahead and throw my vote out there. Would be the 2 spaces, 9 by 18 per space. So it'd be an 18 by 18 if they were together, or 2 single 9 by 18s. That's my vote.
I like that.
If you've got a teenager and you want to keep him home, he gets the garage and you park behind him. Okay, and this parking spot is between the sidewalk and the street, or it has to be on private property?
We're gonna talk about street parking too, but in this case, it does need to be on private property.
Okay, so I can't use the street as my official parking spot.
No, the only place we allow that is in the Holton Business District and the Riverfront District. And the Riverfront District doesn't allow dwellings.
Quick question, does parking count as coverage?
That's a good question. So there's 2 standards. Typically, there is the lot coverage standard, which is the maximum footprint of buildings and structures, which may be on a lot. The other standard where you're pointing to now is the minimum landscaping standard. And I think all across the board, it's 25%. In my 13 years here, I've never seen a new lot exceed that requirement. It's
Okay.
pretty easy to meet.
Okay.
And so that's where your impervious surface comes into play.
Okay, so the structure on the lot coverage, it would not affect that 35%.
Nope.
Okay, that's all I was curious of.
Okay, well, I think we beat up parking pretty good unless there's any more comments or questions. I don't see any. Okay. So related to off-street parking or parking on your private property are driveways. And actually, this title should say driveways, skinny streets, and private streets because they're all related. So one of the tools we have for managing parking are public spaces, and that includes our public streets that allow street parking. And so here are a couple examples. What does this red mean? Oh man, that means fire lane, no parking. Huh. Well, if there's an overflow of parking, where do they go? In the grass? They drive into the ocean back here? Another example, a local one. This is an interesting little basketball court. And even though there's a standard curb there. Yeah, that person decided to use it for a driveway. So driveways. Now our current code says that for your normal detached single family dwelling, one access point is allowed per lot, except duplexes may have one access per street frontage when they're on corner lots. This is something I've thought about for a long time. We adopted our current access rules back in 2010 when we revised our transportation systems plan. And we amended that once because it was like, well, this doesn't make sense. And it further doesn't make sense in my mind practicing some of these laws. And so some of it I would like to explore fixing it, especially in light of these duplex parking standards. So at the low hanging fruit that I think is pretty easy to agree with, but you could always correct me on that. So because our rules say, well, if you have a corner lot, you can have one driveway per street, although I should subject to access spacing requirements, that still applies. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Then, you know, we're supposed to treat them the same. And so number one is a pretty easy one to get behind. Another one that I think makes a lot of sense, having thought about this for some time, is allowing two driveways along streets where there is no on-street parking. The whole idea of limiting driveways is to prevent conflicts with multi-modes. So if you have a bunch of driveways on a street that's really busy and people are using that with their scooters, they're walking, too many driveways provides a lot of chances for conflict. And our streets are about different modes of transportation, vehicles, freight, and the smaller stuff like people walking. But at the same time, people have parking needs too. And that's why I think allowing two driveways along streets with no on-street parking makes sense. In cases like with arterials, you still have a spacing requirement, and that's where this would apply. So if you have a really large lot and you can still make that, then you can get a second access. But there's several slides I'm going to go through here to kind of talk about it all at once. And that's why this is driveways, public skinny streets, and private streets. So number two is something that the Planning Commission was on board with. But let me show you some other things just to help you think about this. So here's our duplex with a single driveway. And imagine you had a similar development on either side. When you have one driveway, there's going to be a good portion in between driveways for parking. So you have parking, on-street parking capacity by controlling your driveways. And so if this was a normal street with on-street parking, and you have one driveway, then you have places to put some of your on-street parking. Now, if we look at the same scenario, same type of development, imagine this on both sides, but with two driveways, oh man, there's not a lot of space to put a car in between these driveways. And so that really impacts your on-street parking, but gets more vehicles off the road. And then, of course, your corner lot, just to show you, since that's one of the things that we talked about. So before we get into, hey, let's talk about this, I want to talk about street classification, because how a street is classified determines whether or not there's on-street parking or not. And we'll look at some cross sections here, but our arterial streets like Old Portland Road, the purpose of that is for through traffic more than access, and it's not designed for on-street parking. And collector streets are similar. And the one exception is some of our special designs in our corridor plans. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So if we examine these cross sections really quick, now the collector and arterial are pretty similar. The general design is your travel lanes, your bike lane, your green or landscape strip, sidewalk, no parking. Your local street is more open for your travel lanes and for on-street parking. Another thing we're going to talk about are skinny streets. And this is something that Councilor Carlson has brought up over the last couple of years of, well, maybe we should relook at some of our skinny streets. And this allows a public street within a 40-foot right-of-way, which is narrower than the typical, and I'll have a right-of-way map up so you can see those differences here. But some of these skinny streets like this one, with a pavement width of 26 feet does allow on-street parking on one side, whereas this 20-foot one doesn't allow on-street parking at all. And this shows some of that a little bit more. So our skinny street standards includes this one and this one. These are also the fire code standards. Now, the Planning Commission felt that we should eliminate the skinny street standard that doesn't allow on-street parking at all. So one thing we could do is get rid of this, keep this, and then adopt this in our skinny street standards. So then at least we know there'll be some on-street parking to accommodate some issues like duplexes being built. Our skinny street standards are limited to where they can be used. They can't be used anywhere. For example, they're limited to 20 lots. Typical uses along a cul-de-sac. So here is some right-of-ways in the city. This is North Vernonia Road, if you're just curious about where this is at. And this is a portion of the Emerald Meadows subdivision. So this is a collector street. You have your 60-foot right-of-way here. And then you have typical local streets where your 50-foot right-of-way is at. But you do have a couple places where the skinny street standard has been used. These little street stubs are good examples of that, only accessing 4 or 6 lots wherever these driveways are at. And then this narrows down here because these lots are less than 20, which is the maximum for the skinny street. So the question is, do you agree with the commission on getting rid of the standard that allows 0 off-street parking? And then another question is this limited capacity for skinny streets. Conceivably, we could look at the duplex rules and go, well, let's have this to 100, which would be 10 lots instead of 20. And that would affect what happened here on Emerald Meadows, where maybe you just have this portion that's a skinny street, but these would still be the same. So the other thing to talk about when we're talking about these streets, actually, wait, let me before we talk about private standards, we have new subdivisions, but the other thing that we have are old standards that are pre-existing and there. And a good example of that is Dubois, or however it's pronounced. Here on the east side of the tracks, this is this old 20-foot road. And what do you have here? No parking sign. And nobody would park in this. That would be insane. But in dealing with...
They park basically on the sidewalk up against the fence. So while it's illegal there, they are there.
Okay. The point of this is we do have some circumstances where there are narrow streets, and this is where that limiting one driveway per dwelling doesn't make sense. It seems like we would want to invite more driveways so people could get stuff off the road. And so this would be a case based on allowing 2 driveways on streets with no parking. This is a case where in my mind, it makes sense. The other thing to talk about are private streets. So we have the skinny street standard that allows a lesser right-of-way width Then we have this private street standard. And this is something the Planning Commission beat around in the late 90s for subdivisions. I actually found that memo cleaning through the office a couple years ago. So these aren't rights of way. Here's Emerald Meadows again. So you have your public rights of way. And then in cases where it's impractical to put a street through there, we have these private access easements. And here are some of the standards for that. You know, it can be as narrow as 15 feet for only 2 dwelling units, or as much as 30, which is less burdensome than their 40-foot right of way. And the Planning Commission, and these wouldn't allow parking on them. The Planning Commission felt that these were still valuable tools for infill development. And, you know, any parking issues would be typically between the neighbors and on that property, and not necessarily spill over into the public right of way. So to recap on all this, how do you feel about changing the driveway rules? And I think the discussion is leaned towards two with staff and the Planning Commission is to allow 2 on streets that do not allow on-street parking, but still maintaining those spacing standards. I guess I should talk about the spacing standards really briefly. So on a local street, it doesn't matter. On a collector street, it's a distance of 100, I think, measured from the center of the driveway. And then on arterial streets, it's 200, maybe 300. So on an arterial street, you'd probably have a hard time getting those 2 driveways unless you had a large lot, as I had mentioned earlier. And then on the skinny street standard, getting rid of the option that doesn't allow on-street parking, but then keeping these private street standards. And a lot of this discussion has been based on conversations with Councilor Carlson, of course, has been the longtime counselor of the planning department, as she's seen some of these developments unfold. So thoughts?
One of the thoughts that I find upsetting is we have a private driveway or a private road because the house is way back. And then somehow we described that it's a skinny street and put a house and a driveway on it that absolutely is squirrely to the neighborhood. But it matches, it didn't match building the house when it was a driveway, but it did match when it was a skinny street. I think you know with the home I'm thinking of.
I have an issue, Jacob. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, I have an issue with that area over there and safety. Mine is with safety with people walking. There seems to be no walkways there. And it seems to me like if you invite parking on a side that you're asking the people who want to go next door for a cup of sugar, that they have to go out in the middle of the street around cars and then back over to their neighbor's home. If I recall, there's no sidewalks there. Is that correct?
And you're referring to the private drive standards?
Yes. No,
that is correct.
No, I'm referring to what is that over there? What's the first edition that you had up over off of Vernonia Road and by Pittsburgh Road? What's that called? Is that Emerald? That one. Now, when I walked in that area, I've walked through that area on several occasions, and kids would be playing out in the middle of the street. There seemed to be no sidewalks, and now somebody wants to put parking alongside, so that if you did walk, you'd have to walk out in the middle of the street rather than at least on the side of it. I don't know. I find that a very congested, unsafe area for pedestrians and kids and children playing.
Doug, I think you may be confused because all that development has sidewalks.
Does that all have sidewalks?
That all has sidewalks. It's all brand new development. It all has sidewalks, both sides of the street.
Yeah, so this, the
So
Skinny Street,
is that the one that's just going, that's just being built or was built 10 years ago?
the one being built.
I'm
That there's-
talking about the one that was built 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Which would be Snow Street, which still has, it still has sidewalks. Snow Street is the off Vernonia here, right? Correct?
Well, I don't know what happened in the past.
Yeah.
But right now we're talking about our current regulations and how we want to change those.
Like,
This-
Okay, yes, I understand that. Okay,
So-
I just wanted to get an understanding.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you're asking, because the whole skinny, when I was thinking about this presentation, I think, this is going to be a challenge trying to, okay, there's the private standard and then there's the public Skinny Street standard. And if we look at the current Skinny Street standard here, it does include sidewalks,
Yes,
but the private street standard, unless it's accessing multi apartments, that requires a walkway, but these other ones don't. And so, for example, let's say lot 30 wants to borrow sugar from lot 32. There's not a dedicated walkway, so this paved swath is assumed to be shared with vehicles and pedestrians.
I find that unsafe.
so, my deal on like a private street like this is that could be a gated community as well. And most private streets are gated communities is in like Portland area. It appears to me to be that way. And I'm just thinking of a chunk of property actually the city owns, and it's called Jacob's Bluff.
Well, that's the informal name. It's not the formal.
It's called Jacob's Bluff, which could be a private street realistically if a developer wanted to develop it. And if we came through and we decided we wanted to do away with the skinny streets on 20 lots, and there's more than 20 lots up there, then they can't go a skinny street standard, or they could also be required to do both sidewalks on two sides, not maybe just one side, which would be up to the developer. And I think, man, I mean, it's really tough. The different scenarios he put out there, Jacob, he did not make it easy on the parking for us to try to make a decision.
Yeah, it is a tough one, and it's one we can continue to work on. If you don't have terribly strong opinions on it, that's fine. I just want to give you the opportunity to present those opinions now.
Jake, up on Long Hill, we vacated the sidewalks because no one was going to walk up there. Now that development's moving in that direction, our paths people said, oh, we've got to have people walking in the street. Too bad there isn't a sidewalk there. I think our thoughts are going to be people walking up and down the street 20 years from right now. And that says a street has got to have at least one sidewalk someplace. Again, the point is that the use that we see right now, if it changes, it can change either direction. One way we can fix it, the other way we cannot. So plan for the future.
And that's why we're talking about these rules. So let's go back to the driveways. What do you think about allowing 2 driveways on streets with no on-street parking? So if there's no parking on this street here,
I like it.
this would be possible.
Yes.
Okay. I think I got head nods from everybody on that. The next question is skinny streets. Based on the planning commission discussion, the premise would be eliminate the 40-foot right of way would still be the same. So you'd still have a canvas for your painting that's 40 foot wide here. It's just a question of what goes in there. And this is the public street, not the private. So The premise there, based on the commission, would be to eliminate this standard, which is 20 feet, no parking at all. Keep this one, and then replace the 20-foot with this one that has parking on both sides. So basically, it's making sure the skinny streets have some on-street parking availability.
Did the planning commission discuss parking on one side?
They did not get into that much detail other than no versus some.
I would, you know, that's the one area where I would like to go forward of a compromise on one side, because you start parking on two sides, things get tricky. And again, it's for safety of kids. It's for safety of individuals walking on those streets. And does that include sidewalks by chance?
In the skinny street standard, yes. Yep.
Okay, so they have a sidewalk to walk on. Is
You
that
would still
correct?
have sidewalks on both sides of the street. This is just from the fire code, so it doesn't
get
show
it.
sidewalks.
And so as many times as we sat through these type of presentations and what's called street calming devices, actually the skinnier streets are actually safer when parking is on both sides, which is crazy, but that is actually a fact, that people go slower when they have that narrowing down and they're actually safer. And that is not from me. That's from the officials that I have sat through, Jacob, and you have definitely know that. We've heard plenty of engineers or planners that have presented to us say that same exact thing, right?
Yeah, when it's constrained, unless you're totally crazy, and there's always going to be those outliers out there, but most people will want to slow down. Whereas when it's straight and wide open, like Sunset Boulevard, people pedal to the metal.
Yes, and if we didn't allow if we allowed parking on one side, not the other, then I would just like to, if people want to stick with the planning commission's recommendation, I would also like to set an ordinance from now on any planning questions that we just divert it to the chairperson of the planning commission, so they can take the number of complaints they get from citizens, that we get from citizens, anytime they want to make a recommendation of something like this. It's frustrating to me when we're trying to move a city forward. And what would that do to these skinny streets if we went ahead and implemented this and there's parking right now allowed on both sides? Would there be no parking signs put up all of a sudden because it's a new city ordinance?
Rick, you're exactly right. And it's kind of unfair for us to make this decision and not have any really kind of reason for what the recommendations are. And I think cause and effect is a very important question. So I agree with exactly what you're saying.
All I can say, and I appreciate all their efforts as far as what they do for the city, but sometimes the planning commission, it doesn't seem thinks it all the way through, because they don't get the phone calls. They want to make decisions based on what makes sense at the time. And again, the presentations I sat through say those streets are actually safer and actually bring a slower speed. They still have sidewalks. So I'm curious as to why the planning commission doesn't have that same type of intel, because they sat through all these presentations on our corridor loops and calming devices and roundabouts and the whole works and the narrowing of streets. They've heard all these discussions before. They're not new to this. So I'm concerned.
So on that street with parking on both sides, and can a garbage truck get into a residence then with that? And are they able to turn around? Are they able to do all of that?
It still has 22 feet on each side
Okay.
by our parking standards, or 22 feet down the middle. A 40-foot road, 9 and 9, is 22 feet left over. They can back in, back out. They can't turn around. They couldn't even turn around probably on the skinny street with it empty.
So this is what the planning commission is saying, you know, let's not allow this. I can't think of when this one has been used. They're saying that the skinny street standard should be wide enough to allow on-street parking at least on one side and can be widened to have it on both sides. So your travel lane still stays the same. The argument behind the lesser standard is reducing overall development costs. But what I think the council, what I think I'm hearing is the council would like to make sure that the skinny street standard does maintain on-street parking at some capacity.
Correct.
Okay, nobody's disagreeing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
I didn't think this presentation was going to go this long, and I'm hoping the next two go a little bit faster. Just saying that.
yeah, I knew it would.
Okay.
And because we have a short window to figure all this out, it's a very important meeting to get valuable feedback from the council. I'll try to go as fast as I can while adequately addressing the issues. And then the only other question is private streets. Councilor Morton talked about concerns over the standards which don't include a walkway in addition to the travel lane or lanes. How does the rest of the council feel about that? So that would widen some of these requirements.
Well, on private streets, is that what we're talking about?
We're
here?
talking about private streets now, yes.
Which is never going to be a public street. It ties into public utility somewhere down the road, of course, and they pay for that service, but it would be their responsibility as far as maintenance through whatever private development CCRs they have, correct?
That's correct, as well as fighting over parking.
And yes, and they would also be in control of that as well, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. That's totally, and you don't have to buy those places. I don't have to buy into that. I'm going to read that agreement before I buy a house there.
People would hope, and we require maintenance agreements to be shared amongst those folks.
Yeah, and we're talking basically about a planned development here, correct?
Yeah, it's a tool for infill development. So
Yes.
without that tool, this would be one big old lot rather than three lots that meet the basic requirements of the zoning district.
Jacob, what happens if we would now want to turn that private street into a public street because of something down the road? Do we have any to chew up the street and widen it to our specifications, or are we stuck with it?
Well, typically we don't accept streets that don't meet our standards. If we, let's say a bunch of people came out and said, you have to take this. That's a good question. I have a feeling that the city would be very resistant to taking over a private street because it doesn't meet any of our standards. And enforcement would be a challenge, maintenance would be a challenge. It just would be a nightmare.
The question comes up is everything on the street really hasn't changed, but across the road or there's a big development someplace, I need to get cars through the area or vehicles through the area. And this private street is, we'll say, the least difficult path.
I see. Yeah, it would have to be widened. So let's say this division over here, let's say there's a rift to hell right here, and well, can't cross Pittsburgh Road, that rift to hell's in the way. So the only way to develop this property or get access to it and that this isn't the case in here, but is through this easement. Now, this easement is 21 feet wide, and that is, that meets our requirement for 3 to 6 dwelling units. But if this was going to accommodate another 50, this would be woefully inadequate. And the developer would have to negotiate with these people to get some special easement, widen it, or dedicate it as right of way, which would make these lots non-conforming. The point of the private access easement is it's intended not to go further.
That's exactly it, Jacob. And that's one thing I wish you would kind of inform the rest of council and correct me if I am wrong, that a private street or a planned development usually is in a spot like the bluff that has no egress, and it allows the builder or developer, or even builder, both all in one, to make use of their land, not anybody else's. They purchased it, and it has no really significant pertinent. The city is definitely going to look at it and say, well, we might see a street going through there someday, and then the city would have an argument and it would have to come before the planning commission. It has to come before the planner and get complete approval on a planned development. It has to go through the planning, a private development. Is that correct, Jacob?
Yeah, we always consider transportation links. That's why in this subdivision in Emerald Meadows, you have this little street stub for Hillcrest, because Hillcrest comes over here and there's just a couple properties in between. So when those properties redevelop in the future, we make sure we get that right of way, and thus the connections made. So public road connections are considered as part of land division. And that's why, Hillcrest, we wouldn't say, oh, we'll let you do a private road, because we know that it wouldn't fly.
Yeah. Because
Okay,
Hillcrest would
Jacob,
go
can
through
I throw another one in? I want this 50 development over here. As a builder, can I go buy those 3 properties and rip it up and put a real road in? Or the builder's constrained by what he can pay and what those people want. But is the city now stuck with a small road, or can they put a big road in because the property alignments have been changed by the new owner?
Yeah, if a builder wanted to purchase 3 lots and demo the homes and reconfigure it to put a road in there, that's certainly possible. Yeah.
Okay, we're not stuck with that road being a small street. We rip the thing up and do it the way we want it.
It could be redeveloped. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, and on that, so our code also allows, no matter what chunk of property, a shared, not parking, driveway up to 3 houses, right, Jacob? Correct?
Yeah, and that's what you see here.
Yes, I mean.
What
so
Councilor?
Part of this is our code that we're talking about here that's already in place that would never change. It wouldn't be pertinent to this anyhow, because person can come in and recite the code and say, I want to do a shared driveway, and it doesn't exceed the 3 house maximum, and it's not a development, because that's right at the threshold. Am I correct in that?
Yes, but we can't allow it in all cases. It has to be the only reasonable method by which a lot large enough to develop can be created.
Sure.
And that's why these are good examples.
Yep.
The question that's kind of before us, and I'm bringing this up because Councilor Carlson has been talking about these over the years, and this duplex stuff brings up parking, and so that's why I'm talking about it, because our council liaison, who has been our council for 8 years now, has brought it up many times in the past few.
Well, so I'm just trying to represent the builders in our community. That's what I'm trying to do, and I can't really speak on behalf of them. And I wish more of them were involved with Planning Commission and came and talked a little bit more about Planning Commission, because it always comes to us like this, and then we're stuck making decisions based on what we hear from you and the recommendation of the Planning Commission, which is one builder on there, And I think the rest of the planning commission, they're qualified, but they're not, there's only one builder is what I understand. And it's really frustrating when, that we have the developers and the builders coming to us again, asking these questions.
So the planning commission was okay with the rules as they are. They
Mhm.
think it's a valuable tool for infill development. Councilor Morton suggested increasing the standard to allow a path. So in this case, instead of a 20-foot swath of pavement, it would be a 24 swath of pavement to have your travel lanes as well as a path. The challenge there would be defining it unless there's a sidewalk and curb.
Um,
But if status quo is where you want to go, that's great.
well, I'll just speak up. I'm not trying to overwhelm the decision on the council, but I just want to speak for an example where I put in 4 building lots, and there is a home that the city is collecting taxes on, will start collecting taxes on, up on my development that, I went ahead with. Now, walk up there and show me where 4 more feet of asphalt or sidewalk can go, where the other 2 lots, if you go past the first 2, the other 2, show me where the 4 feet is there. And basically, you would have cut off even the senior center property from future development. So there's actually maybe an additional lot back there. So 3 additional lots by this standard.
Yeah, Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, on the same token, that I live on a private driveway,
Uh-huh.
or a
Yours
private
is
road
20.
that's called a driveway.
Yes,
and,
yours is even 20.
What's that?
Yours is not even 20 feet, Doug.
Oh, I know, but it could be. Yeah, and so the issue that we have where it's a road, we have no sidewalk. And there have been many, many near misses on the hill that comes down into that arboretum of Gray Cliff area. And so, yeah, there are issues both ways that we kind of got to put up with that, have been done in the past. And I know that Councilor Carlson, I can't speak totally for her, but she comes from more of a livability point of view. I think she lives in a dwelling where parking is an issue. And, just the maneuverability of individuals, especially children, on that street that she lives on is kind of dangerous. And she lives very close to a corner as well. But anyway, I just see it as safety as an issue. But on the other hand, I see it as the builders need a break in terms of what they can do. And hopefully, if they can come to the planning commission, if there are standards, that the planning commission can always grant some conditions, some additional kinds of variances with their concern. And I don't know if that happened with you or not. I kind of think it did. But I'm not certain. But that's what our planning commission is for. The way I see it is for individuals who see that it is not working, especially in a private sector, to ask for variances to allow it to work and allow it to function. Does that happen quite a bit, Jacob?
Our code does allow us to alter the public road standards in unusual circumstances. In Mayor Scholl's case,
Yep.
we use the basic public alley standard. And that's a case where there's no parking and, those additional driveways would just help the situation.
See, so that's my concern. If we put a standard, if we have a standard, we should also have flexibilities in the ability to have variances, just like what the mayor went through. And I don't know if the mayor felt that was unfair that he had to go through that situation, but I see it as something that provides flexibility
Well, a
with a
variance,
standard.
a variance is something you have to apply for. I actually recited city code to the
Yeah.
council and to the planning commission. I actually pulled it out of the code and found it in there. A variance is another application and another 2-month process and waiting on, sometimes Jacob has those ability to just go ahead and if it meets a certain threshold, like 2 feet of it or a foot of it, maybe say, okay, we'll allow it. But if it's all 4 feet, Jacob's gonna have to say, well, guess what? And he's really stringent. And I'm just gonna say this, Jacob is really stringent about making sure he's following our code.
Right.
And there's no flexibility when it exceeds or is right at the limit. It's, you have to go through this process. And even though it makes sense to him, he's still gotta, his hands are tied and has to stand by what is written down. The versus back in the old days, we all know it. I've lived here all my life. Skip Baker would have said, well, let's look at this and let's make this work. And that's just the way it would have happened.
Yeah, we have a lot of flexibilities on access, but I think where you're going on this private drive standard is it meets the intent. When you have a lot of units, that's when the walkway is required. When you only have 3 or so, it's not, and the minimal amount of driveways, or excuse me, units and lots accessed should minimize the vehicular pedestrian conflicts.
Yes. Yes.
Any contrary statements to that effect? Okay, so let's move on. So all the other standards, now some of this I'll go through really fast. We're through most of the big heavy lifting on thinking about this. In residential, we have to have clear and objective standards. We can't have a standard that says, well, if the council likes it, there has to be something to point to. And they can't be exclusive to duplexes. We can't pick on them. So setbacks, some of our districts have the same. In the case of our 10 zone, we don't have any standards at all because duplexes aren't allowed, and we'll apply the single family dwelling standards to those. The apartment residential actually has some greater setbacks for duplexes, and that's something we'll need to fix. We'll probably go to the ones that apply to the single family dwelling. If we do nothing, the model code would restrict the rear to 15 feet. Our R7, R10 zones have 20. And I'm assuming that we would go with that. That wasn't really controversial with the planning commission. Just something to go with. They essentially agreed with going with the single family dwelling standards. Any comments on yard or setback requirements?
No, question just, and I'm not trying to slow you down, but a question on the AR and duplex standard. So can you just keep going right down the line with plexes? Can you have, because it's zoned AR apartment residential, can you literally have 6 plex there? And then right out of that zone, especially your bluff, there's a square up there that's AR. Then the rest goes R5. Can I go immediately after having them abutting to go to duplexes in that R5 and design that R5 lots big enough to just kind of keep doing the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was curious of.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, well, I don't hear any other comments on setbacks. I didn't think so. It's a pretty basic thing. Lot size. Our zoning districts either have no standards or greater standards for duplexes. And so that is something that will need to be fixed. In discussing that, the planning commission looked at the apartment residential standard. So the minimum lot size for detached single-family dwelling in the apartment residential zone is 3,050 square feet. The planning commission felt that that may be kind of small for a duplex, and I don't think we have any apartment residential lots for single dwellings that are that size. So we talked about maybe increasing that lot size a little bit from 3,050 to 4,000 square feet. That is a number that we want to kind of look at a little bit more, but that was a suggestion. So that's something we can explore unless I hear sour grapes from the council in that regard. No sour grapes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what's the future hold? Nobody thought cottage clusters were going to be something that would be actually really cool and well talked about, and we really want to welcome that to our area, and we're slow in getting there. But 10 years ago, I'd have been like, yeah, no, we don't want that rule, you know. Who knows what the future holds?
Yep.
Yeah.
One good thing is building height, lot coverage, minimum landscaping. Those are all the same. There has been some discussions about increasing the base lot coverage, and that is something we can explore with this. The logical thing would be, so earlier, after the mayor kind of asked me about it, you know, we talked about that base being at 35% for most of our zoning districts. And, you know, most of the homes that we see that don't meet that would meet the 40%. And so we could look at just increasing that base lot coverage to 40% instead of 35.
Council, what I could tell you about this is right now you can build a house up to 35% of the lot. And if you want to to get a final, say you had a deck that you want to put on it, and it was so it was going to make it 39%. You cannot do that. But after your final, you can go ahead and do your deck. So right now you cannot plan a house that you want and get a final if you put a deck on it and just be done building the house. You have to actually get a final and then have your builder come through, which you know as well as I do, when you're dealing with a bank, you have to get an appraisal to get it closed. But you're saying I'm going to put a deck on it afterwards. It's just kind of goofy. I would really recommend just going 40 across the board, maximum, done and said. They can apply for, like Lenore did, if they wanted to go 42, which we denied the 42, but we did allow up to 40, I think, on 7 places out of the 8. Correct, Jacob?
Yes, that's correct. So your suggestion would be just go 40 and not have that bump up. The advantage of the bump up is, let's say, because we see a lot of builders maximize the lot coverage.
Yep.
And then someone buys it, and then 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, they want to build a shed or they want to build an addition, and they're stuck at that base lot coverage. And that's the whole idea by having that increase for building additions or sheds, is someone's vision may change over time. And so we could increase the 35 to 40% base and not have that that kicker, or we can just increase everything by 5%. So the base is 40% and then the kicker would be 45.
That would even be better. I can tell you right now, it does not seem like it covers. If you go up in Elk Ridge and look at some of those places right now, they're pushing the 35% on all those places up there. And
yes, and it hasn't been very fun over the years arm wrestling over that.
And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you see the vision and you're like, yeah, but it exceeds it. Is that correct, Jacob? I mean, you see the vision.
Yes.
So.
And we have the standard. We have to treat everybody fairly with the standard.
Yep.
So it becomes an uncomfortable dance.
Yep.
Jacob, the one downside to these limits, and the state doesn't help us at all, is I want to put a house on a lot. I'm only going to use 10%. And I'm going to have a 20,000 square foot house. Obviously, there's a fair amount of tax on that, and it definitely changes the neighborhood. But if everything's starting to be cookie cutter at 35, 40% on a 7 square foot lot, we start looking basically like a pile of cookies rather than a town. How do we get around some of these state, we say, hard regulations towards small? We really are aiming at only one value group of our citizens.
Well, the lot coverage is the maximum total, and the idea is that, you're not building the lot out 100%, so you still have some yard, you still have some air, light, and space between properties. You're getting into what I think is design standards for dwellings when we start talking about regulating appearance and other things. And we're going to be talking about that very soon. But there's only if someone wants to do the same thing over and over again, we would have to have explicit rules that are clear and objective that prevent that.
Can we stop the state from forcing that on us, or are we stuck with them?
We're stuck with allowing duplexes, but as long as the rules we have that we enact are clear and objective and treat duplexes and single family dwellings the same, so they apply to both, we're okay. So if you wanted to have a rule that said, okay, house type A, B, and C, house type A cannot be on consecutive lots. There must be type B, C, or so on forth in between intervening lots. Just thinking about it now off the cuff, I believe that would be clear and objective and something possible to implement in our code.
Okay.
So I would like to hear from Councilor Locke and Morton on this, because this is a big deal, in my opinion. The 35 to 40 maximum, go from 40 to 45 is a fairly significant deal, especially when it comes to duplex.
I'm okay with the increase. I think it's a good thing because, like say, houses are getting bigger and lots are getting smaller, especially with the duplexes.
I concur with that as well. I have to make it's tough to make that decision, but I concur with what Councilor Locke has said, and I feel safe. I feel that that's the safest way to go.
So Jacob, and you having direction on this, is this something that you draw up and would make an ordinance, and then would it be adopted in the future?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
So you have good direction now.
So that's why I'm picking your brains, because this is the beginning of local legislation.
Yep.
And then Steve, we'll get to your AB juxtaposed housing type thing real soon.
Okay, good.
Density calculations, this isn't something to worry about. We just can't treat duplexes in the calculation. So I won't get into that too much. We have our ADU chapter. That's really not changing too much, other than perhaps becoming pointless. Caretaker residence, that's possible in industrial. Because it's not a permitted use, the duplex stuff doesn't matter to that. So then design standards. So this is where we start regulating things that affect appearance. So examples could be entry orientation, that a principal entrance has to face a street, or at least one face a street. It could be maximum glazing or window coverage, articulation, or as Councilor Topaz pointed out, a juxtaposition rule that says the same model homes cannot be on adjacent lots. this would add burden by staff in reviewing building permits. So if we did anything, it should be simple and easy to understand. The one thing the Planning Commission talked about was at least one main dwelling and entry shall face the street. And there are some other things that we have to talk about. And if this is something that you're going to be totally against, you know, I would rather not put any time into it. Councilor Topaz did have that juxtaposition idea, so that may be worth discussing or anything else. But this one's pretty open, and I should say, because we have a limited window of time to do the very basic stuff, you know, this discussion could really go on forever. And there may be a point where we have to say, okay, you know, this is something for a later batch of amendments. We have to get this duplex focus stuff in place. But if there's consensus early on, you know, maybe we can fold that into the code.
Yeah.
So let's start with Topaz's idea. I don't know if there's any interest with the rest of the council about this, and then anything else.
I'm gonna jump in with facing the street. The front door's gotta face the street, not a driveway or a. We have that in our neighborhood here. We had a driveway, a shared driveway that somehow got turned into a street that got turned into a front door entrance. And it really changes the character of the street.
I
Okay, so
agree with Councilor Topaz with that. It's it does change the character of the entire city block and street, and it just doesn't fit. So I do agree with him.
Well, this is kind of unique how you would do that, because I'm thinking down the road further towards the Columbia Tavern is a driveway that actually goes length way back in there, and that house has been there for at least since I remember, so 40 plus years. So actually, there is kind of something similar to that new house, and I know what you're referring to, the Dan Hatfield house. That is brand spanking new, with the driveway, and then there's a house behind it as well, which was actually already pre-developed that way. It was already in the, it wasn't something new. It was so, and I think that's what's going on here. I would be against it because of the fact that with the mobile unit, the front door facing the street, they are not, front doors are lengthwise on those mobile units. I absolutely am not for that.
Well, this is also going to get to be a problem when we start talking about clusters too.
So Oregon Street right now, if you drop down on Oregon Street, you're saying you want to turn all those sideways and face them towards the street instead of lengthwise.
No, they're grandfathered in. I'm talking about new stuff.
That's what we're talking about here, though. Yeah, and I am talking about new development of manufactured homes.
it would probably be a problem for manufactured homes, yes. Since they're pre-built.
Well, that was a definition of manufactured homes. Obviously, it's a fixed design that they're building as compared to a new design that's pre-built. Which
Yeah.
would, again, limit that type of house that looks alike being next to a house that looks alike, next to a house that looks alike. That's the next part that would catch you also.
I would really like to kick this one down the road, like you mentioned, Jacob, because you do have a lot to draw up already around these duplexes. And this is something that can go on and on and on. And personally, I don't feel qualified because I am here working for the citizens and all citizens. I don't feel qualified in order to answer this question on this specific, what you're asking. How did the Planning Commission feel on this?
The Planning Commission, they talked about a main entry facing the street, and they said that was something worth exploring. But other than that, they really didn't get into it.
And again, I'm not a builder. I just know that sitting out here thinking outside the box, what would that do to manufactured homes?
Well, I think you could, Rick, let's see, can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. I think you can make exceptions for that in a manufactured home development. I think you could make exceptions, but in an existing, I think what Topaz is talking about is something that is existing on a street, and you know, like on 3rd Street or 4th Street, South 3rd or 4th. If someone wanted to actually demolish a home and put up a new one, demolish a home that had a front door on facing the street, and build a new home with no door at all facing the street, or no entryway at all, it's probably undesirable with the aesthetic of the, and I think it's a lot about aesthetics of the street. And I think that's what Topaz is talking about. And I somewhat agree, but there has to be, like Rick, like you explained, if there is a development of manufactured homes, there would have to be a variance, or there would have to be some kind of flexibility for those homes to fit in a very meaningful way. And I think, again, that's what the Planning Commission is for. My God, why would we have a commission to make decisions like that and give us recommendations? If a builder wants to do something like that, that's going to be big. That's going to be a big kind of thing. And so that's something for the commission to hear and work through. I think that's, but for existing neighborhoods and residences that have their front door entryways on the street, I think we should stay status quo with that. And that's my opinion. And I feel like you, Rick, I'm not qualified in a sense other than just to give my opinion.
And 95% of the homes we see meet that. So it is the exception that doesn't.
Well, the only exception would be if I found a particular lot and I wanted to have a nice walkway coming up to the front of the house, because the way the windows, it would be a vision thing, like maybe there's a mountain or a brook, or the way the sun sets, whatever it is, why I want that front door on the opposite side. Or it makes logical sense to make a building lot buildable, because that is the clear example of what Topaz is using as that one down, and he's talking right across from the street, and it's the Dan Hatfield one. You would have had a very skinny, tiny home trying to put a front door coming in, versus it opened up to a going width, made it a larger living room coming in through the entry, and allowed the garage and bedrooms to, the layout was a lot different, versus like a manufactured is a skinny, that's what you'd have had there. Matter of fact, that's what you would have had there. Instead of a custom home, you would have had, if somebody wanted to develop that lot, because it was sold so cheaply for 10 grand. I actually happen to know that. Somebody would have hammered it out, and you would have had a manufactured sitting there, but instead you got a custom home that's worth 400 and some, what helps your property value, which maybe you don't want to pay more property taxes. But I would prefer the more expensive home next to me than the cheaper home. So those are things we need to look at too.
Jacob, do they have an architectural review part of the building code? I mean, Rick's thing, I want my front door and windows to look at the sunset, is obviously the way to go. And not everybody has a west view. Is there a mechanism within the Planning Commission that you have an architectural review of the particular plans to exempt the front door facing the street to have a more architecturally acceptable, or is that just not in our code?
None of it's in our code. So if the direction is to explore having an entrance facing the street and explore exceptions to that, that's something we can try to do within the window of time.
Okay, so we have no rules right now, one way or the other.
No, currently we have none. The question is with all this duplex stuff, because conceivably, we'll have more duplexes, and duplexes means 2 units. It means more doorways. Do we want to explore some of these design standards or just let things happen based on the standards we have as it's been going on for decades? And honestly, this is another thing added based on the discussion with our counselor liaison, partly in reaction to that house on 4th Street that we've all been mentioning now. If we just don't want to go there, it certainly makes this process easier. But I'm trying to be comprehensive in dealing with these duplex rules.
No,
And
I appreciate you giving us the options here. I mean, that's your job. So I am totally against it because also the initial one, if you went back to your presentation where we wanted to allow all 3 versus detached, attached, or even side by side, sometimes that front access may need to be off to the side on one and not the other. So like Doug was saying, hypothetically, if he wanted to add an addition to an ADU, well, not only does this affect the duplex, it affects any future development that has to face a street. That's what we're talking about here. So it defeats the purpose of our decision earlier.
And Jacob?
Yeah.
I just feel that that where the address is where the address is on the street, that's where the entryway should be. That's that's my feeling.
Okay, Keith. Need to know what you're thinking here.
Keith, are you awake?
Yeah, I'm here. So, we're talking about a very small minority of percentage of buildings here and whatnot. And because of our town and location and all the little nooks and crannies and rocks and everything else that we have, there's always unusual circumstances. So, I don't think that there's enough of those circumstances around that we need to worry about it. Most things are gonna, be built the right way to start with. I don't think anybody comes in and says, "Oh, let's mess this whole neighborhood up with building something." So, I don't think we need to complicate things too much.
One of the problems, Keith, is the neighborhood really took a hit. I mean, as Rick said, the city got a big hunk of income from the property taxes, but the neighbors figure that, they got hit behind the knees because it doesn't match their attitude that's been going on here 100 years or so. So that one small thing, from a visual point, surprisingly large in that one neighborhood. In the overall town, it's not. And that's where an architectural review board would be helpful.
So, and again, and I get the neighbors' concern. I know them, I mean, very personally, I've known them for years. And what I know is that nobody thought that was a developable lot, but we're talking about Dan Hatfield, who sees our area as not always difficult and is willing to take those risks and those harder projects because we're familiar with him. And and build something there. And you're like, well, man, he really worked hard at it and it doesn't look half bad. Look at that. Wow. And it's a building lot. I mean, he didn't create a lot. It was already there. He just, it was a big rock knoll that was chipped away that nobody ever thought was going to build on. And they kind of acquired it as part of their yard, and people assume that it's not buildable. And when somebody comes through and proves them wrong, I mean, and I just gotta say, this is kind of like any planned development that we see come in the future. Well, we're going to hear about the deer again. We're going to hear about the pheasants that they watch in that field. We're going to hear about, are we supposed to stop growth of St. Helens because people utilize that as their viewing of wildlife?
Rick, at one time, Skip Baker, one of our loving people, said that was not buildable. There was somebody, and they stopped the excavation of that lot. There's a huge amount of funny history. And when you talk about your particular builder, his inconveniencing of the neighborhood by putting all of his equipment not only on the sidewalk, but into the street, not one of the great loved people of the town around here. He had a lot of freedom that other people don't get to build things.
Well, Councilor Patopaz, again, here we are.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't think,
Part of it is done.
I don't particularly care for you being an elected official talking about personally about a builder in that fashion. I feel very uncomfortable that he's not allowed to be here to defend himself when you talk that way, because this is not the first time you've talked about a builder in our area.
I just spoke about our neighborhood, not just me, about our neighbors. So
In
that's
that
fine.
way. In that way. And that's all I want to say.
I know.
I think because the council is split on this issue, it's probably best kicking the design standards down the road and not trying to tackle it with these mandatory duplex things.
Okay.
If there was a clear consensus in the council, I think we could move, but I don't think there is. So that's probably how we're gonna, we can address that when we work on the ADU rules. But because our back is against the wall on time, how does everybody feel about waiting on that discussion?
That's going to be a complicated thing, Jacob, and I think waiting is absolutely necessary.
Okay, no other comments. At least that's a good start to a discussion later on down the road. So that brings us to the last slide, and it was under 2 hours, which I was wondering if this was going to last 2 hours. So time, we have to have this adopted by the end of June. Because of all those things we have to deal with as far as hearings, ordinance readings, timelines to get it to the state, we have to have a draft model code and staff report and all that fun stuff by February 3rd. So basically means over the holidays, we'll whip this stuff up and go through the process that we have to. We'll have to notify all property owners that are affected by these zoning districts. So it will be a very widespread notice, but it's required by state law. So because we're at the beginning of legislative amendments, I have two final questions for the council. One, your blessing to proceed, even though not everything's completely nailed down yet. And would you like me to come back to you before the public hearings with some of the more refined materials?
Yes.
One thing, Jacob, could you be helped if you had one more personnel temporarily to help you, or you and Jenny kind of locked into this?
Well, if we were working on, let's say we wanted to really dig into design standards, in that case, we may want a consultant or something to help with us. But if we're not diving into that and we're just dealing with all these fundamental things, we should be able to handle it. In fact, it's probably a little bit more efficient than having to oversee someone else's work that isn't nearly as intimately familiar with the code as us that use it every day.
Okay.
What I would like personally, you would like it before all this, and particularly because it is going to require a first reading and a second reading, public input allowed, would be the ordinance for lot coverage. Okay?
Yeah, and that's not a hard thing to add. So we will add that to the mix for sure.
Yes, I'd like to see that come to our council very, very soon.
So we will include that with these rules.
Yes, and even if we can get going on that prior to, you know, if it's the first thing on the queue, so to speak, that'd be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, that would be inefficient. And for code amendments, this is a pretty quick time frame, anyways. So I wish all these things we have to do.
Won't they have to be all individual ordinances?
No.
They can all be encompassed in one.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. One file, one ordinance, one staff report.
No
That's where
problem.
the efficiencies come from.
Yes, before would be better though, in my opinion.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Quicker is always better.
No, but you asked if we wanted them before.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
What I was asking, if you wanted us to show you the more refined rules before we, before the public hearings. So we have good guidance now. We'll massage this, work on the code. Do you want to just wait for the hearings or have another presentation of any refinements that we've made?
So why does it require 2 public hearings, Jacob? I'm looking at
It requires 2 public hearings because whenever we're dealing with code amendments, it goes to the planning commission for their recommendation and then the city council for their decision. The planning commission gives a recommendation and that way you know that they've kind of hammered it out, and then the council gives the final blessing or massages it a little bit. And so as with any legislative amendment, be it a zone change or a code amendment, that's how our code is set up.
okay, because I was just looking at that. Yeah. Because it's a month and then another looks like a couple months out from that. So, or a month out from it. Okay. That's what I was curious about. I don't, it's already been kicked around at the planning commission. So we're going to refine it even again at them and then bring it to us, which we're the ultimate no matter what, right? Correct.
Yep, you are the ultimate.
Yeah, I mean, we could go ahead and say we want you to drop an ordinance right now if we chose to, and that would be effective immediately, and we will want it at a sufficient time, give you the right amount of time. On other issues,
If it's not the development code, yes, but the development code does require these notices and these public hearings.
and I get that part of it, yes,
Oh, okay.
but it doesn't require a planning commission public hearing.
If it was not the development code, yes, the planning commission would have nothing to do with it. Or wouldn't be obligated to deal with it. But because it is development code, it is going to go before them for a recommendation at a public hearing setting.
Okay, and then I'd like to also clean up the language, because you can write this down, is in the discussion on the vacating process. Are we going with the planning commission or are we going with the, and I know there's language that needs to be cleaned up in our ordinance on that. So the city council wants to keep that because, I mean, if we're going through with all this hearing process and that's the way it has to go, why wouldn't we add that to it too, just to kind of clean up language? And
Right-of-way vacations?
yes, yes. Because I think there's some language here, Jacob, that we aren't looking at very closely. That talks
There's none.
yeah,
It's the discussion about bringing it to the commission was simply based on a discussion we'd had with the council, when the council said, well, generally, we don't want to give it to the commission, but if you think it's controversial, then ask us first.
Are
I
you
think
sure?
that's the way it
Are
was.
you sure there's not something in our ordinances about that it actually says that it's supposed to go to the planning commission?
No, there's nothing that mandates it.
Okay, all right. I was just reading a comment on a couple meetings ago, and somebody had mentioned that they thought it was in our ordinances that it.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I remember that comment, and that comment came up about 5 years ago. And I just looked at my notes from then to respond to it.
Okay, all right.
All right. Thank you for hanging in with me on there.
Hey,
Yeah.
guess what? Does everybody need a 3 o'clock break? Jacob, is this one done?
This one is done.
Okay, like we're gonna take our 3 o'clock break. It was 2 hours. So, we'll take everybody good with this 6-7 minute break. Council,
Okay.
get a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom. See you in just we'll recess for 6-7 minutes here. Okay, see you in a little bit.
Very good.
Jacob, you're still screen sharing right now, just FYI.
Yep. No, I know. I'm getting ready for my next
Okay, just want to make sure you knew.
next item here.
Okay, got me some more go juice. I'm back. I don't know who else is back. Is everybody back? I can't see because of the screen. I don't want to start without anybody.
Everybody's back, Mayor.
Okay. All right. Well, we're back. Welcome back from recess. And now we are going to go on to next item on our agenda is to discuss the final plat for Hannah Place subdivision. Jacob.
Thank you, Mayor Scholl. So these will be much quicker than the first item. There's several signatures on a final plat, and that's the final document that gets recorded, and that's what cuts the property up into lots. This one is for Hannah Place. And the one thing that I wanted to point out on this one is there is a tract that is proposed to be owned by the city. So it's one accepting the final plat so it can be recorded, and then also the accepting that property for city ownership. This is something that we talked to the city council about back in 2017 when the subdivision started. So these lots highlighted in yellow were the ones that composed the subdivision, and basically what they did is they took these 5 lots and turn it into 10. But we have one of these pesky wetlands up here, and this is a wetland that has an upland protection zone on it. So if we go to the preliminary plat, and the preliminary plat is the, the concept, and a little bit of that protection zone is on that property, not a whole bunch. And we already own this lot highlighted in green. And so on the preliminary plat, that's this here. And so if we look at this subdivision and turn it this way, here's the final plat. Here's the tract that would be under city ownership, as the council approved in 2017, although the makeup of the council was a little bit different back then. But this has been a pretty long journey to get to this point, and they're finally there. So we are asking you tonight to authorize the mayor's signature for the subdivision. I just like to explain it so you understand what is going on at the regular session. So any questions on Hannah Place?
Yes. One of the things, it says we're gonna put townhouses on here, and having experience with townhouses, there's no fire fighting access to the back side of this set of properties, and that's very bothersome. You only have a very limited access to fighting a fire from the front door, no way to get to it from the side. And the way the ground is, there's not an alley behind these properties to bring any equipment there. I have grave reservations about this layout, particularly because of topography. And Jacob and I had some conversations whether the fire department made a good examination of this or not. And evidently they made no comment. And I have, as I say, reservations about the safety of these buildings in case of fire.
So Councilor Topaz is right. Access to the back would be limited for emergency response once these are built out. There will be some setbacks between buildings, but a fire in both buildings could be a concern. But it is built to or designed to our code. Any other?
I have no concerns. I mean, I just know that fire apparatus to the back of my lot is not available either, where I am currently living. And also across the street, it seems like the backs of both those houses there's no fire engines that could get into the backyards of those neighborhoods as well. And I think even the next street and then even the next street over, it's the same way. And I think so on and so on and so on, all the way down to River Street. I do believe.
Some of the houses you can fight at least a little bit from the side. These, other than the ends, you can't fight a fire from the side. You're limited to the front or the top. And
So Jacob, did the fire chief sign off on this?
The fire marshal has an opportunity to review this subdivision just as with any other subdivisions, and they didn't provide any comments. They do express concern when there are narrow streets involved, because they want to make sure that they have access ways that will accommodate emergency vehicles. And then when those access ways are longer than 150 feet, they need a turnaround. But in this case, we didn't get any comments or concerns from the fire marshal.
But he did sign off on it.
There is no formal sign off for the fire marshal of the final plat. We simply ask for their input at the early stages. There will be potential fire marshal input for the development of the structures themselves. And there's something in the building code that says when the fire marshal identifies an access concern, that the building official can require sprinklers or similar alternative methods to mitigate that concern.
But
that
doesn't
would be
the fire marshal have to sign off on issues of being able to turn their fire engine around and doing those kinds of things that the code calls for? I mean, isn't that under his jurisdiction? I know it is in a county that they sign off on those issues. They actually sign off. They look at it and they sign off.
Well, it's going to be no different on this subdivision. We might as well talk about this because it's going to be the same on the Greystone that we are getting ready to go into next. So, I mean, here we go. We're talking 77 units over there. We're talking 10 units here. So we're talking 87 units. That is not even in our wheelhouse. It's actually the fire marshal.
Right.
I'm really kind of concerned that that this particular project, when I feel there's a bias, a conflict of interest with a counselor, because this is the same developer as what was just talked about. And so I have some issues there.
Well, I see what you're saying.
With a bias here.
Rick, you just cleared something up. I didn't know who the developer was. I and Jacob just talked about but if you want to put everything that I'm a bad guy, go for it. But you've got a fire problem here and you can't fight it. And that's coming out of Baltimore and Philadelphia and places that have had these problems with row houses. This is a 300-year-old problem, not a new problem.
Well, so Councilor Topaz, we don't deal with fire. We do not deal with fire. It's up to the fire marshal to do that.
Yeah, the reason I ask if he signs off on it, if he signs off on the plat, then that puts us out of any liability concerns that could come down the line if the whole place went up in flames. So that's the whole reason that I'm asking. And I don't know who's building or who's doing it or whatever. So
all I'm trying to do is stay focused on what's in our wheelhouse so we can get through our agenda.
exactly.
Okay, and you know, it just seems ironic. Okay, so I apologize for my comment, but we're also going to be talking about the same scenario in the next Greystone, the next thing item on the agenda. So I don't feel it's in our wheelhouse, and I don't really feel comfortable in the discussion of this. I mean, that's just me.
I'm not having a discussion, Mayor. I'm just asking.
No.
I was just asking Jacob a question because I don't know if the fire marshals sign off on things anymore or not. I have no idea.
No, and I wasn't talking to you. I was trying to
Okay.
kind of maybe, I don't know, apologize, but I don't see exactly where I'm wrong to Councilor Topaz for my comment, but I don't see exactly where I was wrong in saying what I said. So I'll own it if it appears that that was the way I was coming across, because that's not how I was trying to come across. So I hope you understand that, Councilor Topaz.
I do.
Okay. Yep.
So that's an item for tonight.
And then the next one, go ahead and go on to the next agenda item, Jacob.
Okay, the next one is the same thing, but for a different subdivision. Again, the final plat. In this case, we're not taking ownership of anything. And as far as efforts to get it done, this one was a whole lot of effort in dealing with the blasting, the dirt, the DEQ fines for the dirt and challenging that. But hey, we have a whole lot of lots out there and some streets and other infrastructure. And so it's ready to go. And as a reminder, these are 78 residential lots as well as 2 commercial lots in here. This is just right by Columbia Commons where the DMV State Police is at. Famously known as the Giant Pile of Dirt subdivision for a while. But those days are gone, and I'm sure we'll be seeing a whole lot of building permits on this very soon. But again, this is for authorization of the mayor's signature tonight. Any questions on Greystone?
Only comment I got to say is that that thing turned out amazing. Being a dirt pile in a ditch to where it is now, it is amazing how much work they put into that. I mean, it just blows my mind if you walk out there and walk around it or drive around it.
Yeah, it wasn't a project for the faint of heart, for sure.
Okay, Jacob, thank you very much.
Okay, well, I will stop my share and let you proceed with your meeting. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate all your work, Jacob.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next item, which is review proposed business license amendments. Matt.
All right, I only have about 40 pages to go through, so it shouldn't take too long.
Well, we got.
I'm just kidding. I'm
Yeah.
just kidding, right? Okay. Hopefully this shouldn't take too long, but feel free to interrupt me or wave me if I'm talking over you or if you have a question about anything. I wanted to go over a few of the main changes that we're going to make on the first reading tonight. This is just a first reading. I want to let you know that staff has had some opportunities to review and make some changes in the building codes or the business license codes, as well as we have sent it off to the attorneys who have revised and rewritten a few things that we wanted to change. And so we're all on the same page there. We have also sent the code out to the Chamber of Commerce to release to their members. That was done about a week and a half or so ago. And so hopefully their new office manager person has forwarded that off to their members, but we have given it out to the public for them to review comments, and I have not heard from anyone, which is pretty typical. So a couple changes that I wanted to make you aware of with these new code changes is one that is specific to the building and planning process. Currently, right now, we have it as a requirement that general contractors and subcontractors are required to have a business license in the city of St. Helens. We are changing that requirement so that only the general contractor needs a business license and subcontractors will not need a business license to operate in the city of St. Helens. Normally, this is all managed by the utility billing and building and planning process, where it was a lot of back and forth about who has a business license, who doesn't, and a subcontractor doesn't. And then we have to play phone tag for like a week and then get forms signed and everything. And so the belief right now from the staff perspective is that we don't feel that the subcontractor needs to have a business license, and that all the work basically resides on that general and main contractor. So we're just going to require them. We hope that this will help speed up the business or the building permit process, at least a little bit from the city's perspective. So they'll still be required to check for state licensing that may be required for general contractors and subcontractors, but as long as they have their state license, the subcontractors will not be required to get a business license at the city of St. Helens. Any questions about that?
Make
Okay.
sense.
The other thing I wanted to note is that this is a complete revision and rewrite of the entire business license code. Once we kind of start going in there and changing a few sentences here and a few words there, I was about 45 or an hour into rewriting stuff, and I had so many remarks and deletions and adds that it was just better just to delete everything and restart from scratch. So that's why you don't see any kind of edits or changes or anything in the documents that you see tonight. A couple other things I just want to mention: temporary business licenses are going away. That they are currently the 7-day license. We are changing them to a 60-day license. that is roughly the same price. And basically we have a lot of vendors like for Halloween Town that will get a business license, but they have to get multiple ones because Halloween Town is a month long or a little bit longer than that. So doing a 60-day license, temporary license, will be an option for those types of business licenses that we do. The other thing I included all the applications for the business license so you can get an idea of that. If you're familiar with the business license process, you usually got a packet of about 12 pages of information. We've tried to condense this as much as we can to get just the basic necessities that each department needs to review a business license. So you'll see it's about a 2-page document now. And that's the application that you see in your packet this afternoon, so you can get a see. I am going to share my screen real quick so that I can just go over the fees with you. Oops. Helps if I share the right screen. And these are not on the agenda for tonight's approval. I was going to wait to put these universal fee changes on when we do the final reading, but I did want to go through with them just to give you kind of a taste of what to expect and if we have any questions or issues. The biggest change is going to be with the local business licenses. Right now, the current fee is $65 with a cap of $1,000, and then it's $5 per employee. What we are recommending changing it to is a tiered method, so that 0 to basically 9 employees, you're going to pay $65. 10 to 24.99 employees, you pay $85, and it works its way up to a maximum of $145. What I found in looking at some of the code that we have is we have some fairly large businesses that have a lot of employees. And what ended up happening, I think unintentionally, was that our business code was actually charging in-house, in-resident businesses more than a non-resident business. So in the old way, a non-resident business like Office Depot or Home Depot or whoever was doing something would pay a business license of $120, whereas a business like Letica or another business may pay $1,000 for a business license. So we are hoping to actually reduce business license fees for many of our businesses with this tier method. That is the intention behind this tier method for business license process. The non-resident business license fee, we are recommending to increase to $150 from $120. Residential and commercial rental units will go up $5. So $15 to $20 and $45 to $50. The temporary business license that I mentioned would go from $40 to $50. And once again, the $40 license was a 7-day license, and the new 60-day license will be 50 days, or will be 60 days. The late fees are another thing I just wanted to bring your attention right now. As of right now in the code, it's $40 per month that you are late for renewing your business license with a cap of $120. We are changing that to be $50 as a flat late fee after 60 days. So we had several businesses that for one reason or another didn't pay on time or didn't get a renewal notice or wasn't able to come in. So we're changing this cap so that $50. That way we had some businesses that may pay a late fee of $120 on a $65 license. So we're trying to eliminate those kind of inconsistencies that we don't want to see. OLC application changes, we would like to change to just a $100 flat fee for any kind of renewal, new or changes. So that's a little bit of a change from our current structure right now. Sidewalk and vendor permits will stay the same, as well as the vendor appeal fee if there is one. And then there are no changes to the marijuana licenses from what we currently have. So I know that is a quick overview. Once again, tonight is just the first reading, and then there'll be a second reading and then an approval, hopefully, of this new fee schedule before renewals go out for this upcoming year. We are also are working on online renewals with our new financial code system, so businesses will not have to send in a physical check or come into the office. They'll have the option to pay that renewal fee online.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Question is, so a vendor will pay a $50 60-day fee renewal, right?
Yes.
And then they also have to buy a sidewalk vendor permit as well?
If they have a vendor on a sidewalk, usually this is Jacob's territory for sidewalk vendor fees. I don't know that we do a whole lot of those.
Okay, because I'm just curious of why we couldn't do a 75 a half a year permit for $75. You said it was 150 for a full year, go from 120 to 150.
Yeah, so the, well, I mean, to get to a point, if you're gonna raise the fee, and this is just my opinion, but if you're gonna raise the fee of a temporary use permit, you might as well just force them to get a year-long business license for $65.
If they're local, yeah.
Yeah, if they're local.
But if they're out of town.
If they're out of town, you could,
75 for 6 months versus, you see what I'm saying, instead of the
Correct.
60-day.
Yep.
I think that's what, I know Scappoose does. It's either you buy a whole year or a half year. And they do not give out their building, they do not give out their, for anybody listening, they do not give business license free anymore. I checked recently. I was gonna do a job there, and I went to get a license, and it was gonna be a half a year. And the job didn't check out because of that, which is,
Yeah.
It just didn't for me. It wasn't feasible. But I did acquire, there is no free business licenses from Scappoose.
yep, I'm happy to make that change if that's something you would like to see on the final agenda. I don't think that will change too much of the code language.
But it would allow somebody to work all 13 nights and through,
Yeah, I think usually when we have vendors that are gonna be for Halloween Town and 13 nights and everything, they will usually just pay the $65 if they're a resident. And then in the past, they would pay $120. Usually if they're gonna be there that long, they make enough money to pay the $120.
yes.
So,
I don't know. That's just a thought for me. Make a half year or a year. Don't get rid of the 60 days. It's only 25 more bucks to make it a half year versus 60 days.
yeah,
That was kind of my thought process on it.
so if there's no other questions, that'll be on the docket for a first reading at tonight's meeting.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, come on, it wasn't as long as Jacob. It's not like we spent 2 hours talking about business licenses.
We're passionate about duplex and duplex standards, okay?
I get it.
All right, let's do a strategic action plan updates.
Yes, we do have one thing that John and I wanted to bring up. And as you know, we just started having our ad hoc committee meetings for the police and court facility, what we're kind of calling the public safety facility. And we're on a little bit of a really tight time crunch with the anticipation of potentially going out for a bond in May of 2021. And working our calendar backwards to figure out when we have to get things done to you. It is likely a step that we will need to do some polling in the community as far as if people are willing to even support this effort, as well as if they are, how much they are willing to support it, as far as if it is a bond measure, if it is some kind of other fee, or if they're not willing to support it at all. And when we spoke with the polling agency that helped the school district during their bond process, they suggested to us that we do polling at the end of November or beginning of December. So that time frame is coming up really quick. And what we would like to do is get your authority tonight on approval for John to sign off on an agreement for polling. We're not 100% sure if we can get an agreement back to you in time before we have to do the polling, just because of such a tight timeline. So we would like to request tonight an approval for you to authorize John to sign for doing polling, and we can get that scheduled and set up and a contract back to you afterwards.
Sounds good. We talked about it, discuss it at tonight's meeting. put that as an action item later.
Yep.
Okay, city administrator report. John.
All right, I'll try to keep this brief in the interest of time here. Well, first of all, congratulations to our new council-elects, Patrick Burkle and Jessica Chilton. It's not finalized yet, but it appears that they're the winners of the election, and we've reached out to them today and to offer an orientation to our city facilities and whatever training resources they might need to get up to speed and be part of the team here. So the Riverwalk First Street Strand design RFQs are both open, and we're getting a fair amount of interest. Earlier in the meeting, I was dropped off for a minute to talk with our prospective developer, and he was very excited about that, and it was all very encouraging. So, but yeah, there's a lot of interest in the project around the region. So we made it through October. And our strategy to limit the Halloween town visitors on the weekends, and the COVID safety protocols that we put in place seem to work pretty well. Being gated, ticketed, the masks, just all of it. And there was a lot of people, a whole lot more people that wanted to come. And from a financial perspective, the event appears to have covered the expenses, and some of the local businesses reported, even despite the pandemic here, this October was their very best record on. And it's kind of interesting. The notes were that there's less crowds, but more spending. So there's less people coming, presumably having more space than previous years from crowds, and they're spending more money. But so it's good for some of our local businesses. And we'll have a debrief of the event, the lessons learned. And like every year, we adapt, we adjust, and then try to improve the event. And the Haunted Hotel, if you didn't get a chance to see it, it's really amazing what a high quality experience that is in there. But as we wrap this up and go and head into the holiday season, I wanted to talk a little bit about the decorations this year, the plans for the Christmas ship night on December 12th. That was traditionally we put on the captain's dinner, and Tina Curry and I have been working with some local people to kind of change that up in a way that it might be acceptable to COVID, be COVID compliant. And a lot of it usually depends. The participation depends a lot on the weather. And then some years, last year we drew a lot of people, and a little bit concerned about that. And I've been working with OHA and our local county health official to come up with a plan that might be acceptable. One of the thoughts is to do a Santa at the top of the courthouse, and then have one of these like candy cane shooters, kind of a slide that goes down a pipe, and people can either walk up or drive up and get a treat, and have some elves at the bottom there to try to keep those distances and be safe. And then we had this discussion about Christmas in July, or the issue of having the postponement of fireworks to potentially do it as part of the Christmas celebration. And that is a possibility that we still are within the time frame to be able to do that. We need a 30-day window. So, but I need to have some direction on that, is what we want to do with that. And again, I would say that would be contingent on coming up with an acceptable plan with our health authority folks. And, I don't know if you want to pause and talk about that for a minute.
I think
fireworks.
I like the idea. Of course, I like fireworks, period. I mean, I'm kind of biased about it. I think there's plenty of room down at our waterfront to socially distance. In my opinion, to have my family and other multiple families near their car or 6 feet apart. I mean, we got acres of land down there, and it's got to be almost close to a mile long from the back of the courthouse to the end of the near property. Just my feeling on it.
So I think there's a question of, do we want to have a smaller show similar to we did a couple of years ago? How do we want to pay for it? And then this issue of safety, of what can be done in a COVID compliant, safe kind of way, following the guidelines.
Nobody else commenting on it. They're all asleep, I think, John. I think they're all asleep. I see Keith's laughing. I'm looking at the screen. Keith's laughing. He's not going to comment. Doug's not going to comment. Looks like Topaz is going to comment. Looks like we're a no-go. I mean, these guys are not.
Well, all or part or
So no Christmas ships, no nothing. That's what you guys are saying. Just do not allow anybody downtown for Christmas. No, nothing. Oh, okay. Interesting.
well, the time sensitive issue is the fireworks piece of it. The rest of it has less time.
I think the Christmas ship should happen, and not sure about the captain's dinner or not, whether that can be pulled off. But fireworks is great, and it makes the presentation a little bit bigger and all those kind of things and whatnot. But just I guess it all depends on how much time and energy we want to put into certain things, because we have so much to do now. But I'm always off for a good fireworks show,
Hey, how about this? Do we have polling availability through our website? Can we just throw it out there and let it run for 2 weeks and see what people say? Should or should we not?
What's the estimate this year on what kind of weather we're gonna get for the winter? Cold, rainy, or anything coming up?
What's Tina's advice?
We're just trying to navigate something that would be, something fun to do in the dark of winter, and also overlay that with the COVID safety piece of that. Not doing the tree lighting ceremony, but the tree would go up and be lit. There'd be less things in the plaza for people to congregate around, and do a Santa in a way that's recorded music, Santa in a way that's has 20 or 30 feet of separation rather than 6 feet. But then the fireworks is just a wild card. It's enjoyable.
Well,
Yeah.
I certainly agree with Keith in part, especially about the dinner. I think that would be fairly unreasonable to bring all the crews and captains that are on the boats into City Hall, all in that one crowded space for dinner. I think that's out of the question.
The thought was to be able to work with a caterer to provide kind of a boxed meal that they would come and pick up and take. So yeah, it has to be different because it just doesn't comply at all. So
Exactly.
but still kind of honoring that tradition and kind of appreciation of them coming. So
Well, I like that.
yeah. All right. Well, just to update I'll move on here then. The building inspector position, Mike DeRoy, our building official, has been overwhelmed doing 20 inspections a day. Permits activity is just pouring in the door. But fortunately, it's been hard to get plan reviews done. So the county is kind of stepping in to do our residential inspections to give him some capacity to work through this kind of on a short term until we get somebody on board. And thank you to the county's building program there. The public works director position that the council directed me to offer the position to our top candidate. He's accepted the job. He's passed all his criminal background and reference checks, and is super excited to come to the city. And his scheduled start date is Monday, November 16th.
Forward to having him.
What's that?
We look forward to having him.
We will. And when he does come, we'll get him at the next meeting to come on and do a little meet and greet. It's kind of
Excellent.
a little awkward with the Zoom meeting protocol. But, the Veterans Day is a week from today, November 11th, and there's not a lot going on for Veterans Day around the county. Vivian Roop, which is pretty involved with a lot of things around veterans in our community, has reached out to me, and I sent you the memo that she sent to me about how we can support the veterans, do something. And it sounds like there's something going on at the middle school, which is a small event, but their ask, or her ask specifically, is just to fund a banner to go across on Columbia Boulevard up there. That would be acceptable. What it might say might be another discussion item. It's not a very big expense. And I'm not even confident we can get it done by then, so we can try.
John, did you get my email?
I did.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Which kind of confirmed that there wasn't a lot going on. And rightfully so. I mean, I think there's for all the right reasons, but just on other matters, we submitted a $840,000 grant request to the EPA for, it's called a multi-purpose grant. The grant would advance funding on the waterfront as far as the in-water portion, the areas around the lagoon and on the Veneer property, base of the berm there. And we're also looking at an additional, about this equivalent amount in a different federal program to try to advance some of that work. The urban renewal plan amendment is all complete now, and that's good because this Greystone subdivision is coming online, and that's going to be a boost for us to get that agency back on track there. The funding that we're lining up for the utility design on the waterfront here was scheduled for November. It might be a little bit early, so we're going to try to kick that out to February, because once we obligate that funding, then that 3-year clock starts ticking. But the way we have this mapped out, that we're going to be reviewing RFQs through, or they're going to be until December 4th to submit them. Through December, it's evaluating and negotiating, and then by February, beginning of February, they should be to work and get working. So we're not really spending a lot of money, and it doesn't make sense to obligate that money sooner, unless there's some spike in interest, which I don't foresee at this point. But, I attended a SHEDCO meeting I guess a week and a half ago, and it was very well received. They're very interested in the city's support of a Main Street program and coming up with our memorandum of understanding that was suggested by the Main Street program coordinator, Sherry Stewart, there at the state. And we're working internally to come up with them. There's a few models that we looked at. One we're kind of leaning towards is the City of Independence, which has done a lot of really good work around their Main Street, where that person is a city employee that provides part-time services to their Main Street program and a part-time services to their development association agreement. So hopefully we'll have something for, I know that Mayor Scholl and Councilor President Morton are can be a part of that negotiating team, but we're trying to draft something first before you have a look at it. So. And then as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion, our own Rachel Berry has been nominated to the Governor's Board for Regional Equity and Recovery Council, and she's nominated and will be confirmed here fairly soon, and continuing to try to keep that lens out there. And also, I'm not sure if the council is aware that I've appointed myself to the Broadband Advisory Committee as far as the Northwest region, as far as Colpack, and we're working on solutions for broadband, both just the whole Northwest region, as far as the county's project with their fiber ring, and our still contemplating our local municipal broadband program. So I think that's it.
Quite a bit. All right.
John, can I ask a question? Does the League of Oregon Cities still have that committee of broadband by chance? The legislative review committee.
I think it may have changed names slightly, but I can check on that. It's one of the legislative priority.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was just going to suggest that would be a really good tie-in to the league of what you're doing with Colpack.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. Thank you, John. All right, any other business before we adjourn? We're going to be going into executive session shortly after that, or S192-6602E and H. Any other business?
Last council meeting, I asked some questions about numbers and got cut off only to find out I was allowed to ask them. So I'm going to re-ask. You remember what they are, Rick? I pointed out that as of November, the marijuana production facility owed the city $605,000. And I wanted to know from John if they had paid anything on that. And I also know that we had to pay rent or half of that to Boise, and I wanted to know if anybody knew whether we had paid anything like that. But the other thing was, and this came up to me because of some of the medical work on insurance on product liability. Now, have we seen a certificate from the marijuana production people that they have product liability on the material they're moving out? And do they have workman's compensation? And do they have just liability? Because if anything goes wrong, we're the next deep pocket after them. So I'm just checking that we have seen and a copy of those documents. Can anybody answer that? Okay, thank you.
I will go back and when we ask for this in writing, we never get it. So I'm going to go back and look at what you just said and transcribe that and try to get answers to all those points. So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. It would have been nice to know prior to, so we could have tried to at least provide the information for the public, so you could ask that question and we could provide the answer.
We tried last week. The liability came up with some work on plastics that ended up putting Dow Chemical into big water because of a guy running an extruder ran a pacemaker wire, the extruder too hot, and the court ruled that somehow Dow should understand what any place could do wrong and make it so their product would not be unacceptable. So the courts have a funny way of going after deep pockets, and that's what the real problem was. And you remember the similar things on the breast implants. So that was what generated the last question about, are they covered for product liability? Otherwise, we're covering them.
Yeah, I have no idea. Again, I'm not a state person who would, or an attorney or anything. So you're asking me, do I remember? And I had a hard time even making sense of what you're trying to imply in the first place right now. And I wish we would have had this conversation on the side so I could not do it publicly and know what you're actually wanting, because I had a hard time following that, and I apologize. Maybe I'm a little dumb, and I'm not catching on to exactly what you're asking, but I will try to rewatch it as well and see exactly if you'd like to have this conversation further. I do have my cell phone on me, and I would really like to know what you're trying to talk about, because it sounds concerning.
Yeah, our insurance agent may have all the answers because it seems to be standard for the insurance people.
Be a Chris Iverson person. That's who we talk to. And you do have the ability to talk to Chris.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we're going to go ahead and adjourn. And like I announced earlier, we're going to be going into executive session under ORS 192.6602 E and H. So with that, we are adjourned.